"Why does this school test have your company's watermark on it?" Naomi Carter asked, her pencil still pressed against the red line of code. The billionaire in the back row lowered his phone. Mrs. Delaney's smile did not disappear, but it froze so perfectly it looked painted on. On Naomi's desk lay the impossible test, a sheet of thick white paper covered in crimson code, one corner stamped so faintly most people would have missed it. Aurora 7. "That is a classroom template," Mrs. Delaney said smoothly, reaching for the paper. Naomi moved one small hand over it and whispered, "Then why does it fail at 2:13? 3 hours earlier, before anyone understood what the little girl had just exposed. The advanced STEM lab at Whitmore Preparatory looked more like a private tech showroom than a classroom. Glass walls, polished concrete floors, 12 silver laptops lined in perfect rows. A wall-sized screen glowing with a rotating 3D model of a Mars rover. Every student wore the school blazer, navy with gold stitching, except Naomi, whose second-hand jacket was one shade too dark and whose cuffs had been mended with thread that did not match. She sat near the door, not because anyone had told her to leave, not exactly, but because that was where the extra desk had been placed. It had one wobbling leg and a strip of old tape stuck underneath the edge, collecting dust like a secret. Naomi noticed it before she noticed the students staring. She always noticed what people thought was too small to matter. Across the room, Ethan Brooks leaned back in his chair, a slim laptop open before him, a watch on his wrist worth more than Naomi's mother made in 2 months cleaning offices at night. Behind him sat his father, Nathaniel Brooks, the white billionaire who had donated the lab, funded the scholarships, and arrived that morning with 2 quiet security men and a face that looked tired even when he smiled. He had not come to watch Naomi. He had come to watch Ethan present. Everyone knew that. Mrs. Delaney stood at the front of the class in a cream blazer, her silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, her voice warm enough for parents and sharp enough for children. "Today's challenge," she said, "is designed to separate real preparedness from good intentions." Several students glanced toward Naomi without turning their heads all the way. Naomi kept her eyes on her pencil. It was short, yellow, and sharpened unevenly with a pocket blade because the electric sharpener in the lab had jammed when she tried to use it last week. Mrs. Delaney placed glossy packets on each desk. For the other students, the packets were labeled Team Robotics Simulation. For Naomi, there was only a single sheet, face down. Mrs. Delaney paused beside her longer than necessary. Her perfume smelled like lemon and cold metal. "Since you claim you belong in this room," she said softly enough that it sounded private and loud enough that everyone heard, "you may complete an independent assessment." Ethan looked over. Nathaniel did not. Not yet. Naomi turned the page over. Red code covered the paper from top to bottom, dense and angry, with one line boxed faintly in gray as if someone had tried to hide it under the print. At the top, bold letters read, "Failed by MIT finalists." A boy near the window let out a breathy laugh. A girl lifted her phone just above her notebook. Mrs. Delaney folded her hands. "If you cannot complete it, Naomi, there is no shame in admitting that this program may be moving too quickly for you." Naomi did not cry. She did not look at the camera phone. She pressed her pencil tip gently to the paper and followed the code line by line, not like a student solving a puzzle, but like a child listening through a wall. Her mother had once told her that rich buildings had their own sounds after midnight. Elevators sighing, vents clicking, keyboards tapping behind locked doors. Naomi had waited in those hallways enough nights to know when something mechanical was pretending to be quiet. On the paper, one character sat where it should not have been. Not large, not dramatic, just one tiny mark inside a recovery command. Naomi's fingers tightened. Mrs. Delaney turned away too quickly, already smiling toward the rest of the class. "You may begin." Naomi raised her hand. No one called on her. She lowered it, stood, and spoke anyway. "This isn't a test." The room went still in that cruel way a room gets still before it decides whether to laugh. Mrs. Delaney turned back, her expression polished and patient. "Excuse me." Naomi slid the paper a few inches forward. "This is real code." Ethan sat up a little, annoyed. Nathaniel finally lifted his eyes. Mrs. Delaney reached for the sheet with 2 fingers, still smiling, but Naomi saw the smallest thing. The teacher's thumb pressed directly over the faint gray corner, covering the watermark before anyone else could see it. Naomi looked past her, straight at the billionaire in the back row. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Somebody changed this after it was printed." Nathaniel frowned, not believing her, but no longer looking away. And under Mrs. Delaney's thumb, just visible where the ink had not fully dried, the timestamp read 2:13 a.m. Mrs. Delaney's thumb stayed pressed over the corner of the paper 1 second too long. Not enough for a child who wanted attention to notice. More than enough for Naomi. "I think you're confused," the teacher said gently, her voice smoothing itself back into place. "Corporate templates are publicly available online all the time." She laughed softly after saying it, the kind of laugh adults used when they wanted everyone else to relax with them. A few students obeyed immediately. Chairs squeaked. Someone near the windows snorted under his breath. But Nathaniel Brooks did not sit back down. He stepped closer to Naomi's desk and held out his hand. "May I?" Naomi looked at the paper before giving it to him. She noticed another detail then. There was a faint smear near the timestamp, as if someone had tried to rub away a number while the ink was still warm. Nathaniel took the sheet carefully, not like schoolwork, but like something breakable. Ethan leaned over from his chair. "Dad, it's probably just copied from one of the Aurora demos," he muttered, though he sounded less certain now. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed on the code. The room had gone strangely quiet except for the hum of the overhead projector and the distant tapping of rain against the glass wall behind the robotic stations. Mrs. Delaney crossed the room with calm, measured steps. "Mr. Brooks," she said warmly, "I'm so sorry for the disruption. Naomi is very bright, but sometimes scholarship students feel pressure to prove themselves." Scholarship students. Naomi heard the phrase land in the room like a label being stapled onto a file. Nathaniel finally looked up. "You printed this morning?" he asked. "Late last night," Mrs. Delaney corrected smoothly. "I finalized lesson materials after dinner." Naomi's eyes shifted toward the timestamp again. 2:13 a.m. was not late dinner. It was middle-of-the-night quiet. The kind of hour when janitors rolled carts through empty hallways and office lights stayed on only if somebody did not want to be seen leaving. Nathaniel folded the page once. Thoughtful. "Aurora retired this formatting style 6 months ago." Mrs. Delaney smiled instantly. Too instantly. "Then I suppose the online source was outdated." Naomi saw Ethan glance at his father, then quickly away again. That was the first moment she realized Ethan knew something felt wrong too. Not because he trusted her. Because his father had stopped pretending this was nothing. Mrs. Delaney clapped her hands lightly. "All right. Everyone back to work. Let's not waste Mr. Brooks' visit over a misunderstanding." The students slowly turned back toward their laptops, though nobody really resumed working. Screens glowed untouched while eyes kept drifting toward Naomi's desk. One girl near the front tilted her phone lower, pretending to check messages while still recording. Naomi quietly slid her pencil into her sleeve. She had learned a long time ago that when adults became too calm, something underneath was moving fast. Nathaniel handed the paper back to Mrs. Delaney, but not before taking a photo of the timestamp with his phone. Small movement, barely visible. Naomi noticed anyway. Mrs. Delaney noticed too. For less than a second, her fingers tightened against the page hard enough to wrinkle the corner. Then the smile returned. "Ethan," she said brightly, "why don't you show your father the rover simulations?" Ethan hesitated. "Sure." But he did not stand right away. His attention stayed on the code. Sheet still held against Mrs. Delaney's chest. Naomi looked past the teacher toward the glass equipment cabinet near the back wall. The cabinet reflected the room faintly like dark water. In the reflection, she saw Mrs. Delaney slip her phone halfway from her pocket and glance down quickly before hiding it again. Just one flash of the screen. But Naomi caught 2 things. A text notification and the sender's name. Vale. Did he notice the timestamp? Naomi felt something cold move slowly through her stomach. Gregory Vale was not a teacher. Gregory Vale was the man whose face hung 3 stories high inside Aurora Tower beside Nathaniel Brooks on the company leadership wall. And at exactly 2:13 every morning, while Naomi waited for her mother to finish cleaning the executive floor, Gregory Vale's office light was always still on. Naomi kept staring at the reflection in the glass cabinet long after Mrs. Delaney slipped the phone back into her pocket. Giovanni. The name sat heavily in her mind because she had seen it too many nights in too many polished places meant for people like him. Aurora Tower after midnight always smelled faintly of coffee beans and floor cleaner. Gregory Vale's office always smelled like cedar cologne and burned espresso. Naomi remembered because his trash can was the only one on the executive floor that still had warm cups in it at 2 in the morning. Naomi. Mrs. Delaney's voice cut through the room gently enough to sound kind. Perhaps you should focus on your own assignment now. Naomi looked up. The teacher's smile had returned completely, but her eyes had not. They stayed sharp and fixed on Naomi's face, measuring her the way adults measure children when deciding how much trouble they might become. Nathaniel Brooks walked slowly toward the massive screen at the front of the lab where Ethan's rover simulation still rotated silently. "Ethan," he said without looking back. "Come with me a second." Ethan grabbed his laptop immediately. As they crossed the room, Nathaniel paused beside Mrs. Delaney. "Could you email me the source file for this exercise?" he asked casually. "Of course," she answered too fast. Then, almost instantly after speaking, she corrected herself. "I mean, if the district licensing allows redistribution." Nathaniel's eyes shifted toward her for half a beat. Small pause. Small mistake. But Naomi saw it land. Because a second earlier Mrs. Delaney had spoken as if she owned the file herself. Ethan followed his father into the hallway outside the lab. Through the glass wall, Naomi could see them talking quietly near the trophy case. Nathaniel held out his hand. Ethan unlocked his laptop and turned the screen toward him. Mrs. Delaney noticed too. She moved toward the blinds beside the glass wall and adjusted them halfway closed. Not enough to hide the conversation entirely, just enough to blur it. "Everyone," she said brightly, clapping once. "Back to work. We have a competition next week, and unlike internet conspiracy theories, deadlines are real." A few students laughed nervously. Naomi stayed still. Her eyes drifted toward the teacher's desk near the projector controls. There, beside a stainless steel coffee tumbler, sat a white envelope partially tucked beneath grading folders. One corner stuck out just enough for her to read the printed logo. Aurora Systems Internal Courier. Naomi's stomach tightened slowly. Internal courier envelopes were not mailed outside the company. Her mother emptied dozens of them from executive trash bins every week. Mrs. Delaney noticed Naomi looking. In one smooth motion, she slid the envelope fully under the stack. "Do you need something?" she asked. Naomi shook her head once. "No, ma'am." But her fingers tightened around the little pencil in her sleeve. Near the windows, rain rolled down the glass in long silver lines. Somewhere farther down the hall, a television played faintly from the student lounge, muffled voices talking about stock markets and election polls. The ordinary sounds made the room feel stranger somehow, as if real life had continued moving while something underneath it quietly cracked open. Nathaniel returned alone a minute later. Ethan was no longer beside him. Naomi noticed that immediately too. Nathaniel walked back to the rear seats, slower this time. Before sitting down, he looked once toward Mrs. Delaney's desk, toward the hidden envelope, then toward Naomi. Not trust, not belief, but attention now, careful attention. Mrs. Delaney resumed teaching, her voice calm and polished, but twice she lost her place while reading instructions from the board. The second time, she called the project Aurora, instead of Atlas, the official school assignment name. Silence flickered through the room for barely a second before she corrected herself with a soft laugh. "Too much coffee today." Nobody reacted except Naomi, because adults only corrected names that quickly when the wrong one had been sitting in their head already. Then Nathaniel's phone vibrated. He glanced down at the screen. His expression did not change, but he stopped moving entirely. Naomi could not see the full message from where she sat. Only the first line reflected faintly in the dark edge of the glass cabinet behind him. Access log confirmed. User, Gregory Vale, 2:13 a.m. Nathaniel stared at the message on his phone for so long the screen dimmed in his hand. Access log confirmed. User, Gregory Vale, 2:13 a.m. Then the notification disappeared into black glass, leaving only his own reflection looking back at him. Across the room, Mrs. Delaney had already recovered. "All right," she said with practiced brightness. "Since today has apparently become theater, let's settle this properly." She moved toward the center presentation screen and tapped the control tablet. The giant monitor behind her shifted from rover simulations back to the Crimson Code. "Naomi believes she has discovered a hidden flaw," she continued. "So perhaps she'd like to demonstrate that for all of us." Several students straightened immediately, sensing humiliation the way children sensed rain before a storm. Ethan looked sharply at his father. "Dad, this is stupid," he muttered quietly. Nathaniel did not answer. His attention stayed on Mrs. Delaney now. Not openly suspicious, but alert. The kind of alertness powerful people developed when a room stopped behaving the way it was supposed to. Mrs. Delaney smiled toward Naomi again. "Come on," she said gently. "You made a very serious accusation. Surely you can explain it." Naomi stayed seated for a second, longer than people expected. Around her, expensive keyboards clicked softly as students pretended to work while watching everything. Outside the glass walls, 2 security men stood near the entrance lobby downstairs, dark suits motionless beneath the silver school crest. Naomi suddenly became aware of how small her desk looked compared to the rest of the room. Smaller laptop, smaller chair, smaller space around her. Even the charging cable taped beside her desk was yellowed with age while everyone else had wireless docks glowing blue. She stood anyway. The giant screen washed the room in red light as she walked toward it. Her shoes squeaked faintly against the polished concrete floor. Someone laughed under their breath. Mrs. Delaney stepped aside with graceful politeness, though not quite enough space for Naomi to stand comfortably at the screen. "Go ahead," she said. "Show us what MIT finalists somehow missed." A few students smiled at that. Naomi looked at the code without touching the keyboard. "You don't need all of it," she said quietly. "Just that line." She pointed toward the recovery command halfway down the screen. Mrs. Delaney folded her arms loosely. "Then fix it." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. "If I fix it," she asked, "do you want the fake version fixed? Or the real one?" The room went still again. Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Mrs. Delaney laughed first. Too quickly. "There is no real one, Naomi." Naomi finally touched the keyboard. Instead of typing immediately, she leaned closer to the screen. The red reflection flickered across her face. Then she reached up and erased one tiny character with a single backspace. Just one. Nothing dramatic happened at first. Ethan frowned. "That's it." Then the simulation window behind the code refreshed automatically. Green lines flooded the side monitor. 1 second later, another screen opened by itself. Accessing shadow layer. Mrs. Delaney's smile vanished before she could stop it. Ethan stood abruptly. "What is that?" Naomi stepped back from the keyboard. "The system was waiting for someone to remove the delay trigger," she said softly. "It wasn't broken. It was hiding." Nathaniel moved toward the screen so fast his chair scraped loudly across the floor behind him. The room flinched at the sound. One of the engineers accompanying him came forward immediately, pale now, eyes scanning the monitor. "That shouldn't exist," the man whispered. The side screen kept populating lines automatically. Transfer queues, backup paths, hidden access permissions. Naomi noticed Mrs. Delaney reach slowly toward the control tablet at her side. Calm motion, careful motion, like someone lowering a volume knob. "I think we should stop this demonstration," she said evenly. "Whatever unauthorized material got mixed into the file clearly isn't appropriate for students." Nathaniel looked at her then. long enough that she stopped moving for half a second. Naomi saw it. So did Ethan. But Mrs. Delaney recovered quickly and tapped the tablet anyway. The monitor went black instantly. Silence dropped across the room except for rain tapping softly against the windows. Mrs. Delaney exhaled with a controlled little smile. "There," she said. "Problem solved." Then a new sound broke the silence. Nathaniel's phone vibrated again. He glanced down. His expression changed for the first time all morning. Because even after the classroom monitors were shut off, the hidden transfer log was still running live on Aurora's main server. The classroom monitors were black now, but Nathaniel's phone continued glowing in his hand like something alive. Lines of transfer activity kept updating across the Aurora server feed even after Mrs. Delaney had shut the system down. Someone in the room inhaled sharply. One of Nathaniel's engineers stepped closer. "Sir," he said quietly, "those packets are still moving." Mrs. Delaney turned toward him with calm disbelief already prepared on her face. "I think we're making this much larger than it is," she said. "A corrupted classroom simulation is not corporate espionage." Her tone stayed professional, measured, almost sympathetic. The kind of voice designed to make anyone questioning her feel irrational. Nathaniel locked his phone screen without answering. Naomi noticed he did not put the phone away this time. He kept it in his hand. Ethan moved beside his father and lowered his voice. "Dad, should we call security?" Mrs. Delaney heard that. Naomi saw it in the tiny shift near her mouth before the smile returned. "Security?" the teacher repeated lightly. "Over a coding exercise?" Then she turned toward Naomi. "You've caused quite enough disruption for one morning." The words sounded polite. The room heard the warning underneath them anyway. Naomi looked down at her desk. The old yellow pencil was still tucked in her sleeve. Beside her backpack sat the red code packet Mrs. Delaney had forgotten to retrieve after shutting off the monitors. Naomi slid it quietly into her bag before anyone noticed. Or almost anyone. Nathaniel noticed. He said nothing. Rain continued tapping softly against the glass walls while students pretended not to stare. Somewhere down the hallway, a bell rang faintly for another class change. But nobody inside the STEM lab moved yet. The atmosphere had thickened too much. Mrs. Delaney gathered her tablet and grading folders with controlled hands. "Mr. Brooks," she said warmly, "perhaps we should continue this conversation privately with the administration instead of alarming children." Nathaniel studied her for a moment before nodding once. Perhaps. But he did not leave. Instead, he walked slowly toward Naomi's desk. The room became so quiet Naomi could hear the faint buzz from the fluorescent strip beneath the counter near the sink stations. Nathaniel stopped beside her chair. "You said somebody changed the code after it was printed," he said calmly. "Why?" Naomi hesitated. Not because she was unsure. Because she was deciding whether telling the truth would cost her mother her job. She finally opened her backpack and removed the folded red packet. "Because this page isn't the same paper as the others." Nathaniel frowned slightly. Naomi flipped the packet over carefully. The back page was thicker than the rest, almost glossy under the classroom lights. At the bottom corner sat a tiny silver mark no larger than a fingernail. Internal courier routing label. Nathaniel's expression did not change immediately, but he stopped breathing for half a second. Naomi saw it. So did Ethan. "Where did you get that?" Ethan asked. Naomi looked at him. It was already attached. Mrs. Delaney stepped forward quickly, then stopped herself just as quickly. "That proves nothing," she said. "Schools receive donated materials all the time." Nathaniel took the page from Naomi carefully. His thumb brushed the silver routing label once. Then again, like he recognized the texture. Naomi watched something old move behind his eyes. A memory. Aurora used silver routing labels only for executive-level prototype transfers. Not public demos. Not school partnerships. Executive transfers. Nathaniel turned the page over slowly. On the back, almost invisible beneath the printer marks, sat the faded imprint of another document that had once been stacked on top of it. 3 typed words pressed faintly into the paper. Emergency recovery authorization. Nathaniel went very still. Ethan looked confused. What does that mean? He asked quietly. Nathaniel did not answer right away. Across the room, Mrs. Delaney picked up her phone again, angling the screen slightly away this time. Too late. Naomi already saw the message preview flash across it. He knows about the recovery file. Delete the rest. Naomi's fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. But Nathaniel was no longer looking at the phone. He was staring at the silver routing label in his hand with the expression of a man beginning to realize that somebody inside his company had not just leaked code. Somebody had accessed a system only 4 people in the world were supposed to know existed. And Gregory Vale was one of them. Nathaniel kept holding the silver routing page long after the room fell silent again. Not gripping it tightly, just holding it the way people held photographs they had not expected to see twice in one lifetime. Mrs. Delaney adjusted the folders against her chest and smiled carefully at the students. All right, she said softly. I think we've all had enough excitement for one class period. Her tone had changed. Less warm now, more controlled. Naomi noticed she no longer looked directly at Nathaniel when speaking. The billionaire folded the paper once and slipped it inside the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Ethan, he said quietly, pack your things. Ethan blinked. Are we leaving? Not yet. Nathaniel's eyes moved briefly toward Mrs. Delaney. But we're done treating this like a school assignment. Nobody in the room spoke after that. Students lowered laptops slowly. Chairs scraped against polished floors. Rain continued sliding down the glass walls in silver streaks while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city skyline. Naomi picked up her backpack carefully, making sure the remaining code sheets stayed flat inside. She could feel Mrs. Delaney watching her now with a different kind of attention. Not annoyance anymore. Calculation. Near the doorway, one of Nathaniel's security men stepped inside at last after receiving a quiet text. Mr. Brooks. Nathaniel did not turn around. Call Daniel Mercer. The guard gave a small nod immediately. Naomi recognized the name. Daniel Mercer was Aurora's private corporate attorney. Her mother used to mention him because executives always lowered their voices when he entered a room at night. Mrs. Delaney's expression flickered for the first time. Tiny. Fast. But real. Surely legal counsel is unnecessary, she said lightly. We're discussing a misunderstanding involving educational materials. Nathaniel finally looked directly at her. Educational materials don't carry executive recovery authorization labels. The room went colder after that sentence. Ethan stared at his father quietly. It sounded like the first honest thing Nathaniel had said all morning. Mrs. Delaney laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor left in it. I think someone is feeding you a dramatic story, Mr. Brooks. Naomi spoke before Nathaniel could answer. Nobody fed me anything. Her voice was small in the huge room, but it carried anyway. Mrs. Delaney turned toward her instantly. Naomi, adults are speaking. Naomi tightened one hand around the strap of her backpack. My mother cleans the executive floor at Aurora, she said. I wait there after school sometimes. The teacher's face remained perfectly calm, though one finger pressed harder against the folders she carried. Nathaniel did not interrupt. Naomi continued carefully. Every night the lights go off at midnight except 3 offices. Yours, Mr. Vale's, and server operations. Ethan looked sharply at her. Nathaniel stayed very still. 2 weeks ago, Naomi said quietly, Mr. Vale started leaving later than everybody else. Around 2 in the morning. Mrs. Delaney stepped forward. This is inappropriate. And yesterday, Naomi added before losing courage, he carried boxes into the server hall himself. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Gregory Vale never carried anything himself. Not files. Not coffee. Not even his own coat. The detail landed because it did not fit the man Nathaniel thought he knew. A long silence followed. Somewhere beyond the lab walls, a television from the student lounge murmured through static about market volatility and tech losses. Then a phone vibrated softly against a desktop. Mrs. Delaney reached for hers too quickly before realizing everyone had noticed. She slowed her hand midway, forcing the motion calm again. Nathaniel watched that happen without blinking. Naomi looked down at the floor for a second. "I don't want money," she said suddenly. The sentence sounded almost strange in the middle of all the polished technology and expensive shoes. "I just don't want my mom blamed if people start asking questions." Nathaniel looked at her then. Really looked at her for the first time since entering the classroom that morning. Not a disruptive scholarship kid. Not a child trying to impress adults. A girl protecting the only person she had. His phone buzzed again. This time he opened the message immediately. Attached beneath the transfer logs was a still image from Aurora security footage. Gregory Vale entering the executive server corridor at 2:11 a.m. Beside him, holding the secured access door open with her faculty badge from Whitmore Preparatory, stood Mrs. Delaney. For 3 long seconds, nobody in the STEM lab moved after Nathaniel saw the security image on his phone. Mrs. Delaney's faculty badge glowed clearly beneath the server corridor scanner beside Gregory Vale's shoulder. The timestamp in the corner read 2:11 a.m. Rain whispered against the glass walls while somewhere deeper in the building a vacuum cleaner hummed faintly through the hallway. Ordinary sounds. Wrong moment. Mrs. Delaney recovered first. "That proves I attended a corporate fundraising event last night," she said evenly. "Whitmore Preparatory partners with Aurora every year." Nathaniel slipped the phone screen dark again before anyone else could study it too long. "Of course," he said calmly. His voice had become quieter now. That frightened Ethan more than anger would have. Naomi watched Mrs. Delaney carefully. The teacher no longer smiled unless someone was directly looking at her. "Mr. Brooks," she continued, "I strongly recommend we avoid frightening students with misunderstandings involving sensitive company systems." Nathaniel gave a small nod as if considering her advice seriously. "I agree." Naomi looked up sharply at him then, confused for the first time all day. But Nathaniel's expression revealed nothing. He turned toward the class instead. "Actually," he said lightly, "I think Mrs. Delaney is right. This has already disrupted enough learning for one morning." Mrs. Delaney relaxed too quickly. Tiny exhale. Tiny lowering of the shoulders. Naomi saw it immediately. Nathaniel saw Naomi see it. "So let's simplify things," Nathaniel continued. "One small clarification and we can all move on." He walked slowly toward the front demonstration desk where the black classroom tablet still rested beside a half-finished bottle of water. The tablet controlled every simulation uploaded that day. Nathaniel placed one hand lightly against the edge of the desk. "Mrs. Delaney," he said casually, "would you mind reopening the exact file Naomi accessed earlier?" Mrs. Delaney's fingers tightened slightly around her folders. "The monitors are already shut down." "I know." Nathaniel smiled politely. "I'd just like to verify we're discussing the same material." Silence stretched through the room. Naomi noticed Ethan stop pretending to organize his backpack. Even the students recording on their phones had gone completely still now. Mrs. Delaney walked toward the desk with measured calm. "Of course," she said, "though I'm not sure what this will accomplish." She reached for the tablet, then stopped. Barely noticeable. Just 1 second too long before entering the passcode. Nathaniel watched that pause carefully. Naomi watched it too. Mrs. Delaney reopened the classroom server list. Several harmless school files appeared. Robotics Lab Atlas Simulation. Student Archive. But the red code file from earlier was gone. "Interesting," Nathaniel said mildly. Mrs. Delaney gave a helpless little laugh. "Looks like someone accidentally deleted it during all this confusion." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Maybe." Then he looked toward Naomi. "You said the hidden layer only activated after the delay trigger was removed?" Naomi swallowed once. "Yes, sir." "And the line was connected to recovery access?" "Yes." Mrs. Delaney interrupted gently. "Again, we're relying on a child's interpretation of code she shouldn't even understand." Nathaniel did not look at her. "Naomi," he said quietly, "when the shadow layer opened earlier, did you notice anything else?" Naomi hesitated. Not because she did not know. because she suddenly understood he was building something, testing something. Her fingers tightened around her backpack strap. The transfer path, she said softly. It rerouted through an external archive before the shutdown. Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. External to where? Naomi looked directly at Mrs. Delaney, then back at him. Not Aurora. The room went silent again. Nathaniel finally turned toward Mrs. Delaney. Calm. Controlled. That's strange, he said, because only someone with executive authorization could create an external recovery route. Mrs. Delaney smiled carefully, but one hand had drifted unconsciously toward the tablet screen, blocking part of it from view. Nathaniel noticed. Without changing expression, he stepped closer and gently rotated the tablet toward himself. A small loading bar blinked at the bottom corner. Restoring autosave files. Nobody breathed while the percentage climbed. 22%. 41%. 67%. Mrs. Delaney's phone vibrated suddenly against the desk beside the water bottle. No one touched it. The screen lit up anyway. Gregory Vale. Did you erase the archive path yet? Naomi looked at Mrs. Delaney. Mrs. Delaney looked at Nathaniel. And for the first time since this began, the teacher understood the little girl was no longer standing alone. Mrs. Delaney did not touch the phone. Neither did Nathaniel. The glowing message sat on the desk between them like something radioactive. Gregory Vale. Did you erase the archive path yet? The auto-restore bar on the classroom tablet continued climbing in tiny silent increments. 81%. 89%. Naomi could hear the soft electrical buzz from the projector overhead and, farther away, the muffled squeak of janitor wheels somewhere down the hallway. For one strange second, all she could think about was her mother downstairs, probably still working without any idea what was happening above her head. Mrs. Delaney finally exhaled carefully. Mr. Brooks, she said, her voice almost gentle now. I think we should speak privately before students misunderstand something that could damage reputations. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Whose reputation? He asked quietly. She did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. The classroom tablet chimed softly. Autosave recovered. Ethan stepped toward the screen instinctively, but Nathaniel lifted one hand slightly without looking at him. Stop. Wait. Control. Naomi noticed Mrs. Delaney glance once toward the door. Tiny movement. Calculating distance. Nathaniel noticed too. Please stay, he said calmly. The politeness in his voice sounded colder than shouting would have. Nathaniel reached down and rotated the tablet fully toward himself. The recovered archive opened automatically. Not code this time. Video files. Time-stamped server corridor footage from Aurora Tower. Mrs. Delaney's face lost color so gradually it was almost invisible unless someone had been watching her all morning. Naomi had. Nathaniel pressed play. Grainy black and white security footage flickered onto the giant classroom screen above them. The executive server hallway appeared first. Polished floors, silver walls, fluorescent midnight silence.
Timestamp, 2:12 a.m.
Gregory Vale entered frame carrying a thin black case. Mrs. Delaney followed beside him using her faculty keycard to override the secondary security lock. Ethan stared upward in disbelief. Why would she even have access to Aurora? He whispered. Nobody answered. The footage continued. Gregory opened the server room door halfway, then paused suddenly and looked directly down the hallway, toward another camera farther back. Naomi's stomach tightened. She remembered that hallway. Remembered sitting cross-legged outside the janitor closet doing homework while her mother cleaned conference rooms nearby. Then another figure appeared briefly at the edge of the footage. Small, thin, backpack on her lap. Naomi. Nathaniel froze. The room seemed to lose all sound around him. On screen, 12-year-old Naomi sat quietly near the service elevator while Gregory and Mrs. Delaney disappeared into the server corridor. A timestamp ticked slowly past 2:13 a.m. Ethan looked sharply toward Naomi now. You saw them. Naomi nodded once. I didn't know it mattered then. Her voice sounded smaller than before. Mr. Vale told me the hallway was closed for maintenance. Nathaniel kept staring at the screen. Not at Gregory. At Naomi. A child sitting alone at 2 in the morning under the fluorescent lights of his company, while executives moved stolen files 20 feet away. The footage continued another minute before suddenly cutting to static. File interrupted. Mrs. Delaney found her voice again first. "This proves nothing illegal," she said quickly. "Gregory asked me to review educational partnership materials." "At 2:13 in the morning?" Ethan snapped. She turned toward him too fast. "You don't understand corporate scheduling." Nathaniel finally spoke, still looking at the frozen image of Naomi sitting alone outside the server hall. "No," he said softly. "I think I understand perfectly." The room went completely silent after that. Even the rain seemed quieter now. Nathaniel stepped closer to the screen. His reflection overlapped the image of Naomi from the footage for a brief second. Then he noticed something else. Near the bottom corner of the interrupted video sat a secondary file path stamped automatically into the archive metadata. External transfer authorization. End. Brooks. Nathaniel went pale. Ethan looked confused again. "Dad." Nathaniel removed his glasses slowly. His own executive authorization had been used to move the files. Not forged badly. Not copied carelessly. Used correctly. Which meant somebody inside Aurora had possessed access close enough to him to bypass every safeguard in the company. For years, Nathaniel had trusted Gregory Vale with nearly everything. Board votes, recovery systems, emergency authorizations, even Ethan's future inheritance structure inside Aurora. Naomi looked at the screen once more and quietly pointed toward the bottom corner of the footage. "That's not your signature," she said. Nathaniel stared harder. She was right. It looked identical at first glance. But one letter curved slightly wrong. Gregory had copied it from digital forms for so long he no longer wrote the signature naturally. Nathaniel closed his eyes for one brief moment. When he opened them again, something inside him had changed completely. He handed the tablet silently to his security chief without taking his eyes off the frozen screen. Then, very calmly, he said, "Call my attorney." Nobody spoke after Nathaniel said the words. "Call my attorney." The sentence landed softly in the STEM lab, but it changed the entire room. Mrs. Delaney stopped pretending to smile. Ethan looked between his father and the frozen security image still glowing above them. Naomi stood near the edge of the classroom, clutching her backpack straps so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Outside the glass walls, students from other classes walked through the hallway laughing, carrying coffee cups and backpacks, completely unaware that one quiet room inside Whitmore Preparatory had just cracked open something much larger than a school scandal. Nathaniel's attorney arrived within 20 minutes. Daniel Mercer entered without raising his voice, carrying a slim leather folder beneath one arm. 2 Aurora security officers followed him. Mrs. Delaney tried once more to regain control. "This is becoming extremely inappropriate," she said sharply. "You cannot interrogate faculty members in front of children." Daniel Mercer calmly placed a printed authorization form on the desk beside her. "Actually," he replied, "Aurora Systems can investigate unauthorized access to executive recovery servers anywhere those breaches occurred." Mrs. Delaney's eyes flicked toward the door. Not panic yet. Calculation again. But slower now. The recovered server footage, transfer logs, forged authorization trail, and text messages were copied immediately from the classroom tablet under legal hold. By evening, Gregory Vale's executive credentials had been suspended, his office sealed, and Aurora's board notified that internal theft involving protected recovery systems was under investigation. The next morning, every major financial site carried the same headline in different forms. Aurora executive under review after security breach. Gregory resigned before noon. Mrs. Delaney was placed on administrative leave before the second school bell rang. But the part Nathaniel could not stop thinking about was not the headlines. It was the image of Naomi sitting alone outside the executive server corridor at 2:13 in the morning, while adults in expensive suits moved secrets around her like she was invisible. 2 days later, Nathaniel returned to Whitmore Preparatory quietly. No press. No cameras. Rainwater still darkened the front steps from an early storm. He found Naomi in the cafeteria sitting alone near the vending machines, eating crackers from a plastic bag while doing math homework beside a carton of milk. She looked up cautiously when he approached. "You're not in trouble," Nathaniel said softly before she could stand. Naomi nodded once but did not fully relax. Nathaniel noticed the habit immediately. Children only learned to prepare for blame that quickly when life had trained them to expect it. He sat across from her at the small cafeteria table. For a moment neither of them spoke. Around them, trays clattered softly, and a television mounted near the ceiling murmured about traffic and weather. Finally Nathaniel placed a folder gently on the table between them. "Your mother's employment contract with Aurora," he said. Naomi blinked. Inside the folder sat updated payroll records, full benefits restoration, overtime compensation dating back 18 months, and a signed transfer authorization, moving Angela Carter from overnight janitorial labor into daytime facilities management with double the salary. Naomi stared at the papers without touching them. "Nobody should have been hiding her hours off book," Nathaniel said quietly. "Not in my company." Naomi swallowed hard once. She thought if she complained, they'd fire her. Nathaniel looked down briefly at his own hands. "I know. That was the part that hurt most. Not Gregory's betrayal. Not the forged signatures. The fact that people under his own roof had been too afraid to speak because they believed no one powerful would listen anyway." Whitmore Preparatory issued a formal apology the following week. Naomi's academic record was publicly corrected. The independent desk near the door disappeared from the STEM lab entirely. Mrs. Delaney's partnership credentials with Aurora were permanently revoked pending the legal investigation. Gregory Vale faced fraud charges and federal review over the stolen recovery systems. But the moment Naomi remembered years later was smaller than all of that. It happened one quiet evening after the lawyers, investigations, and board meetings finally slowed down. Nathaniel visited the Carter apartment carrying a new winter coat for Naomi because he had noticed her old one missing 2 buttons during the stormy walk to school. The apartment smelled faintly of laundry soap and tomato soup simmering on the stove. Angela Carter kept apologizing for the size of the place until Nathaniel finally said very gently, "Please stop apologizing for surviving." Silence filled the tiny kitchen after that. Naomi sat at the table beside the window, her old yellow pencil still tucked behind one ear. The same pencil she had used to circle the line of code nobody else wanted to see. Nathaniel noticed she had kept it. "Why didn't you stay quiet?" he asked her softly. Naomi looked down at the warm bowl of soup in front of her before answering. "Because everybody kept acting like the wrong thing was normal." Nathaniel could not speak for a moment after that. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the apartment window, while the kitchen light glowed warm over the small table. And for the first time in a very long time, the most powerful man in the room was finally listening to the person everyone else had overlooked.